Tom Bradley wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as he watched the elegant woman in hiking boots carefully examine the rusted shovel he'd just handed her. Little did he know that this simple act of neighborly kindness would transform his failing farm into something he could never have imagined. The stranger claimed she was tracing old country paths, but the truth would soon reveal itself in ways that would challenge everything Tom thought he knew about his land, his future, and the hidden history buried beneath his struggling crops. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across Tom Bradley's 40-acre farm as he surveyed the damage from the previous night's storm. Broken fence posts jutted from the muddy ground like crooked teeth, and debris from his neighbor's property had scattered across his already struggling cornfield. At 53, Tom had weathered many storms, both literal and metaphorical, but this latest setback felt like salt in an already festering wound. His arthritic hands gripped the porch railing as he contemplated the repair costs he couldn't afford. The bank notice crumpled in his shirt pocket served as a constant reminder that he had less than 3 months to catch up on his mortgage payments, or lose the land that had been in his family for 4 generations. The irony wasn't lost on him that his great-great-grandfather had built this homestead with nothing but determination and calloused hands, while Tom, despite decades of backbreaking work, was on the verge of losing it all. The sound of footsteps on gravel interrupted his brooding thoughts. A woman approached from the direction of the old county road, her appearance immediately striking against the rural backdrop. She wore expensive hiking boots that looked barely broken in, khaki pants with crisp creases, and a field jacket that suggested outdoor expertise without the wear marks of actual use. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a leather satchel that seemed more suited to a boardroom than a country walk. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying a slight accent Tom couldn't immediately place. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm having a bit of trouble with some research I'm conducting in this area." Tom straightened, his natural politeness overriding his curiosity about what kind of research would bring such a well-dressed woman to his remote corner of the county. What kind of trouble might that be? The woman approached the fence line, her eyes scanning the landscape with an intensity that seemed to catalog every detail. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm tracing some historical pathways through this region. Old country roads and trails that have been lost to time. I was hoping to do some exploratory digging near what my maps suggest might be an old roadbed, but I seem to have forgotten to pack proper tools." Tom shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip despite the soft appearance of her palms. "You're talking about the old settlers' trail that used to run through here?" Elena's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "You know about it? That's wonderful! Most people I've spoken with have no idea these historical routes even existed. The trail I'm researching supposedly connected several homesteads in this area back in the 1800s, serving as a crucial link for early settlers. My great-great-grandfather used to tell stories about that trail," Tom said, surprised to find himself engaged in conversation with this stranger. "Said it was how the first families got supplies from the trading post over in Millerville before the main roads were built. Course, that was long before my time. Would you mind if I did some exploratory work on your property? I promise I won't disturb anything significant. Just some light digging to see if I can find traces of the original roadbed. I'm particularly interested in a section that my historical maps suggest ran right through this area." Tom glanced back at his damaged farm, weighing the woman's request against his long list of pressing concerns. Normally, he might have been more cautious about allowing strangers to dig around his property, but something about Elena's professional demeanor and obvious knowledge of local history put him at ease. Besides, what harm could a little historical research do? "I don't see why that would be a problem," he said finally. "Though I have to warn you, the ground's pretty torn up from last night's storm. Might make your digging a bit more challenging." Elena smiled, and Tom noticed how the expression transformed her entire face, revealing a warmth that her professional exterior had initially concealed. "Actually, storms can sometimes be helpful for this kind of work. They expose things that have been buried for decades, sometimes centuries." "What kind of tools were you needing?" Tom asked, already mentally cataloging what he might have available in his cluttered tool shed. Just something basic for preliminary excavation. A shovel would be perfect. I have more sophisticated equipment back at my office, but for initial exploration, simple tools are often the most effective. Tom nodded toward the weathered barn that stood about 50 yards from the main house. I've got an old shovel in the shed over there. It's seen better days, but it'll dig a hole same as any other. They walked together across the uneven ground, Tom pointing out various landmarks as they went. That depression over there near the oak grove, that's where the old well used to be. My grandfather filled it in back in the 60s after we got county water, but you can still see the outline if you know what to look for. Elena stopped walking and pulled a small notebook from her satchel, quickly sketching the area Tom had indicated. These kinds of details are invaluable, she said, her pen moving rapidly across the page. Original wells often mark important stopping points along historical routes. Travelers would plan their journeys around known water sources. The tool shed was a testament to 4 generations of Bradley family farming, filled with implements spanning nearly a century of agricultural evolution. Rusty hand tools hung from pegboard walls, while larger equipment occupied the floor space in various states of repair and disrepair. Tom located the shovel he had in mind, a sturdy but well-worn implement with a wooden handle smoothed by decades of use. "This belonged to my father," he said, running his hand along the handle. "He used it for everything from digging fence posts to planting trees. The blade's gotten pretty rusty over the years, but it's still solid." Elena accepted the shovel with the reverence of someone who understood the weight of history carried by everyday objects. "These old tools often tell stories of their own," she said, examining the wear patterns on the metal blade. "The way they're worn, the repairs that have been made, they're artifacts in themselves." "I never thought of it that way," Tom admitted. "To me, it's always just been a shovel. That's the beautiful thing about historical preservation," Elena said, her enthusiasm evident in her voice. "We're surrounded by history, though we often don't recognize it because it's hidden in plain sight. The most extraordinary discoveries sometimes come from the most ordinary places." They walked back toward the area where Elena wanted to begin her exploration, near a slight rise in the land that she claimed her maps indicated as a potential route for the old trail. Tom watched as she began to carefully examine the ground, occasionally kneeling to brush away leaves and debris with her hands. "You seem to know quite a bit about this kind of work," Tom observed. "Is this what you do for a living?" Elena looked up from her examination of the soil. "I'm a cultural historian specializing in rural heritage preservation. I work with various organizations to identify and protect historically significant sites, particularly those related to early American settlement patterns." "Sounds like interesting work," Tom said, though he wasn't entirely sure what cultural heritage preservation entailed in practical terms. "It is, though it can be challenging," Eleanor replied, beginning to dig carefully in a spot where the ground showed slight discoloration. "Many historically significant sites are lost because people don't realize their importance. By the time historians like me discover them, development or neglect has often destroyed crucial evidence." Tom watched as she worked, noting the methodical way she approached the task. Each shovelful of earth was carefully examined before being set aside, and she frequently stopped to make notes in her notebook or take photographs with a professional-looking camera she produced from her satchel. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked after several minutes of observation. "Evidence of human activity, primarily," Elena explained without stopping her careful excavation. "Packed earth that might indicate a roadway, artifacts like pottery shards or metal objects, changes in soil composition that suggest long-term use of an area. Sometimes it's dramatic, like finding a coin or a piece of leather. But more often, it's subtle things that only become significant when you understand the broader historical context." End quote. As if summoned by her words, the shovel blade struck something solid with a metallic ring. Elena immediately stopped digging and switched to using her hands, carefully brushing away soil to reveal what appeared to be a piece of rusted iron. "Wow, that's interesting," she murmured, gently working the object free from the earth. It appeared to be some kind of bracket or hardware, heavily corroded but still intact. "This looks like it might be part of a wagon fitting, possibly from the right time period." Tom leaned closer to examine the artifact. You can tell all that from a rusty piece of metal? Years of experience, Elena said with a smile. Plus, it's all about context. Finding a piece like this in this location, given what we know about historical traffic patterns in the area, suggests we might be on the right track. She carefully wrapped the metal piece in a cloth and placed it in her satchel, then returned to her systematic exploration of the area. Over the next hour, she uncovered several additional items. A few pottery shards, what appeared to be a horseshoe nail, and a section of ground where the soil showed clear signs of compaction consistent with repeated heavy use. This is remarkable, Elena said, sitting back on her heels and surveying the small excavation site. I wasn't expecting to find this much evidence in such a preliminary exploration. Your property appears to sit directly on what was once a major thoroughfare for early settlers in this region. Tom felt a strange mix of pride and bewilderment. His struggling farm, the land he'd been on the verge of losing, apparently held historical significance he'd never imagined. So what does this mean exactly? Elena carefully packed away her tools and artifacts before answering. It means your land might be eligible for historical designation and preservation status. There are federal and state programs designed to protect and maintain sites of historical significance, often with substantial financial support for property owners. The words hit Tom like a physical blow, though not an unpleasant one. Financial support sounded like something from a dream, given his current circumstances. What kind of financial support are we talking about? It varies depending on the specific designation and the level of historical significance, Elena said diplomatically. But sites that can be documented as part of early settlement patterns often qualify for substantial grants, tax incentives, and sometimes ongoing maintenance funding. There are also opportunities for educational partnerships and heritage tourism that can provide additional income streams. End quote. Tom's mind raced as he tried to process the implications of what Elena was suggesting. Heritage tourism and educational partnerships were concepts so far removed from his experience of subsistence farming that they might as well have been science fiction. I'd need to do much more extensive research, of course, Elena continued. What we've found today is encouraging, but it's just the beginning. I'd want to bring in some colleagues, do ground-penetrating radar surveys, conduct more systematic excavations. With your permission, naturally. Of course, Tom said automatically, though part of his mind was still trying to catch up with the rapid turn his morning had taken. How long would that kind of research take? Several weeks, possibly a few months for a thorough investigation, Eleanor replied. But I could have preliminary results much sooner, possibly within a week or two. If the initial findings support what we've discovered today, I could begin the process of applying for emergency preservation status, which would provide some immediate protections and potentially access to emergency funding. End quote. Emergency funding. The words seemed to echo in Tom's mind as he watched Elena pack up her equipment. He thought about the bank notice in his pocket, about the 3-month deadline that had seemed so insurmountable just hours earlier. Dr. Vasquez, he said slowly, I don't want to seem mercenary about this, but I'm in a pretty tight spot financially. If there's a chance this historical stuff could help me keep my farm, I'd be very interested in pursuing it. Elena's expression grew more serious, and she studied Tom's face with the same intensity she'd applied to examining the soil. Mr. Bradley, I want to be completely honest with you. Historical preservation can be a lengthy process, and there are no guarantees. However, if your property proves to be as significant as today's findings suggest, there are emergency provisions designed specifically to help property owners in situations like yours. End. She pulled a business card from her wallet and handed it to Tom. I'm going to make some calls as soon as I get back to my office. I work with a network of historians, archaeologists, and preservation specialists who can move quickly when necessary. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to return tomorrow with a small team to begin more systematic documentation. Tom looked at the business card, noting the impressive array of credentials and affiliations listed beneath Elena's name. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Ph.D., Director of Rural Heritage Studies, National Trust for Historic Preservation, Senior Fellow, American Heritage Foundation. This was clearly not someone playing around with a hobby. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, extending the shovel toward her. "You're welcome to keep this as long as you need it." Elena shook her head and gently pushed the tool back toward him. "Thank you, but I'll have proper equipment tomorrow. Besides, this shovel belongs here. It's part of the story of this place, part of the continuity that makes sites like this so important to preserve." They walked back toward the main road together, Tom's mind churning with questions and possibilities he couldn't quite articulate. The morning had begun with storm damage and financial despair, but it was ending with something that felt suspiciously like hope. "One more thing, Mr. Bradley," Elena said, as they reached her car, a light model SUV that looked as professionally maintained as everything else about her. "I noticed some of the landscape features on your property that suggest there might be even more historical significance here than just the trail, that depression where the old well was, the way the land rises and falls in certain patterns, even the placement of your original farmhouse. They all suggest this might have been a more substantial settlement site than a simple way station." "What do you mean by more substantial?" "Possibly a trading post, maybe even a small community hub. Places where multiple trails converged often developed into early commercial centers. If that's the case here, we could be looking at a site of regional rather than just local historical importance." End quote. Elena climbed into her vehicle and rolled down the window. "I'll be in touch very soon, Mr. Bradley, and thank you for your hospitality and for sharing your family's knowledge of this area. Local oral history is often the key to understanding what we find in the ground." Tom watched her drive away, the dust cloud from her departure slowly settling in the still morning air. He looked out at the business card in his hand, then back at the small excavation site visible in the distance. The rusty shovel felt heavier somehow, weighted with new significance. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety for Tom. He found himself repeatedly walking to the spot where Elena had done her preliminary digging, looking for signs of the historical significance she claimed to have discovered. To his untrained eye, it still looked like nothing more than a small hole in the ground, but he found himself seeing his entire property through different eyes. The old oak grove, where his great-grandfather used to tell stories, suddenly seemed like it might have witnessed conversations between early settlers. The slight rise near his back pasture, which he'd always assumed was natural topography, now appeared possibly artificial, perhaps the remains of a structure or earthwork. Even his own farmhouse, built by his great-great-grandfather in the 1890s, seemed to occupy its position with more intentionality than he'd previously considered. On the third day after Elena's visit, Tom was repairing fence posts damaged in the storm when he heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching on the county road. A convoy of 3 cars turned into his driveway, led by Elena's familiar SUV. Tom set down his post-hole digger and walked toward the house, nervous energy building in his chest. Elena emerged from the lead vehicle accompanied by 2 men and another woman, all carrying various pieces of equipment and looking every bit as professional as Elena herself. The second car disgorged a team that looked more like scientists, with ground-penetrating radar equipment and what appeared to be surveying instruments. The third vehicle contained 2 people in suits who looked distinctly official. "Mr. Bradley?" Elena called out as the group assembled near his front porch. "Thank you for agreeing to let us proceed with the expanded investigation. I'd like you to meet my colleagues." The introductions were a whirlwind of advanced degrees and impressive titles. Dr. James Harrison was an archaeologist specializing in colonial and early American settlement patterns. Dr. Sarah Chen was a soil scientist and expert in ground-penetrating radar analysis. Dr. Michael Roberts was a historian focused on early American trade routes and commercial development. The 2 people in suits were Alice Morrison from the State Historic Preservation Office and David Part from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. "Mr. Bradley," Alice Morrison said, stepping forward with a briefcase and an air of official authority, "Dr. Vasquez has shared her preliminary findings with our office, and I have to say, we're very intrigued by what she's discovered here. If her initial assessment proves correct, your property could be eligible for Emergency Historical Designation." Tom felt overwhelmed by the sudden influx of experts and officials. Emergency designation? It's a provision designed to fast-track the preservation process for sites that face imminent threat of destruction or damage, David Park explained. Dr. Vasquez mentioned that you're facing some financial pressures that could potentially impact the historical integrity of this site. The euphemistic phrasing made Tom's impending foreclosure sound almost academic, but he appreciated the tactful approach. That's right. I've got about 10 weeks before the bank takes action. Alice Morrison and David Park exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes. That's actually perfect timing, Morrison said. Emergency historical designation can often be processed within 30 to 60 days, and it comes with immediate protections and access to emergency preservation funding. What kind of funding? Why? Tom asked, not wanting to seem too eager but unable to contain his curiosity. Emergency preservation grants can range from $50,000 to several $100,000, depending on the scope and significance of the site, Park replied. Plus, once a site receives historical designation, property owners become eligible for ongoing maintenance grants, tax incentives, and revenue sharing from heritage tourism programs. The numbers hit Tom like a physical force. $50,000 would solve his immediate crisis, and several $100,000 would transform his entire life. He struggled to maintain his composure as the team began unloading their equipment. Of course, Elena interjected. We need to confirm the historical significance through proper investigation before any of that becomes possible. What we found the other day was promising, but it's just the beginning. Over the next 6 hours, Tom watched his property transform into something resembling an archaeological dig site. The ground-penetrating radar revealed what appeared to be extensive subsurface structures and patterns consistent with significant historical activity. Dr. Harrison's careful excavations uncovered a wealth of artifacts, pottery shards, metal implements, coins from the early 1800 ASS, and what appeared to be the foundation stones of a substantial AS structure. The most exciting discovery came when Dr. Chen's radar detected what appeared to be a network of underground storage areas near the main excavation site. When they carefully excavated one of these areas, they found it to be a root cellar or storage facility that had been expertly constructed with stone walls and a drainage system that had kept it remarkably well preserved for over 2 centuries. This changes everything, Dr. Roberts said as he examined photographs of the storage facility on his laptop. This level of infrastructure indicates a permanent settlement, not just a way station or temporary camp. We're looking at what was probably a trading post or small commercial center, possibly one of the most significant early settlement sites in this entire region." End quote. Elena was practically vibrating with excitement as she documented each new discovery. The artifacts we're finding span at least 50 years of continuous occupation, from the early 1800s through the mid-1800s. This site represents a crucial link in understanding how commerce and community developed in rural America during the westward Datra expansion period. By late afternoon, the official representatives from the preservation organizations were making phone calls and filling out forms with an urgency that Tom found both encouraging and slightly overwhelming. Alice Morrison approached him as the archaeological team continued their work. "Mr. Bradley, based on what we've documented today, I'm prepared to recommend immediate emergency historical designation for your property. This would provide immediate legal protections and qualify you for emergency preservation funding within 2 weeks." Tom's knees felt weak. How much emergency funding are we talking about? Given the scope and apparent significance of this site, I would estimate the initial emergency grant at around $200,000. With the possibility of additional funding as the investigation continues. There would also be immediate qualification for federal tax credits that could significantly reduce your tax burden, and once we complete the quote, full historical assessment, ongoing preservation grants that could provide substantial annual income, end quote. The world seemed to spin around Tom as he tried to process what Morrison was telling him. $200,000 would not only save his farm, but provide him with more financial security than he'd ever imagined possible. Tax credits and ongoing grants suggested a fundamental transformation of his entire economic situation. "There is one thing we need to discuss," David Park said, joining the conversation. "Historical designation does come with certain restrictions on how the property can be used and developed. You'd essentially become a steward of a historical site, with responsibilities for maintaining its historical integrity. What does that mean in practical terms? Tom asked. It means you'd work with our organizations to develop a management plan for the site, Elena explained. Part of your property would be designated as the core historical area, with strict protections. The rest could continue to be used for appropriate agricultural purposes, though any major changes would need to be approved through our preservation review process. You'd also have opportunities to participate in heritage tourism programs, Morrison added. Educational groups, historical societies, and tourists interested in early American history would pay to visit and learn about the site. Property owners typically receive a substantial percentage of tourism revenue. Tom looked across his property, trying to imagine tour groups walking the same paths where he'd spent decades struggling to make a living from stubborn soil and unpredictable weather. The irony was almost overwhelming. The idea that his greatest asset had been buried beneath his feet all along, waiting for someone with the knowledge to recognize its value. Dr. Vasquez, he said, turning to Elena, when you first asked to borrow that shovel, did you have any idea what you might find here? Elena smiled, the same warm expression that had initially put him at ease days earlier. I hoped we might find evidence of the old trail, but honestly, Mr. Bradley, what we've discovered here exceeds my most optimistic expectations. This site has the potential to reshape our understanding of early settlement patterns in this entire region." End quote. The shovel, Tom said suddenly, struck by a thought. My father's old shovel that you used for the first excavation. If this site is as historically significant as you're saying, doesn't that make the shovel historically significant too? The archaeological team looked at each other with expressions of delighted surprise. Dr. Harrison was the first to speak. Actually, Mr. Bradley, you raise an excellent point. Tools used in the discovery of significant historical sites often become part of the historical record themselves. Your father's shovel could very well end up in a museum display about this discovery. More immediately, Elena added, tools with provenance connecting them to the discovery of historically significant sites can be quite valuable to collectors and museums. Not that I'm suggesting you should sell it, but it's another example of how historical preservation can create value in unexpected ways. As the sun began to set, the team packed up their equipment with the satisfied air of people who had accomplished something significant. Alice Morrison handed Tom a folder thick with paperwork and contact information. Mr. Bradley, I'll be submitting the emergency designation application first thing tomorrow morning. You should hear back within 2 weeks, possibly sooner. In the meantime, the site is now under preliminary protection, which means you have legal backing if anyone tries to interfere with the preservation process. David Park shook Tom's hand with genuine warmth. Mr. Bradley, I've been working in historic preservation for 25 years, and I can honestly say that discoveries like this are what make all the bureaucracy and paperwork worthwhile. Your willingness to let Dr. Vasquez explore your property has potentially saved one of the most significant early American historical sites in this region. As the convoy of vehicles departed, Tom stood alone in his driveway, holding the folder of paperwork and trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the space of less than a week, his life had been completely transformed by the simple act of lending a rusty shovel to a stranger. The next several weeks passed in a blur of phone calls, site visits, and paperwork. The emergency historical bay designation was approved in record time, bringing with it the promised emergency preservation grant of $200,000. Tom paid off his mortgage with money left over to make long overdue repairs to his house and farm buildings. More teams of researchers arrived to conduct increasingly sophisticated investigations of the site. They discovered that the trading post had been a crucial hub in a network of early American commerce, connecting frontier settlements with established markets in the East. Artifacts from the site included goods from as far away as New England and the Gulf Coast, indicating the remarkable reach of early American trade networks. The storage facilities revealed evidence of a sophisticated system for preserving and trading food, furs, and manufactured goods. The archaeological team determined that the site had operated continuously for nearly 50 years, making it one of the longest operating early American trading posts yet discovered. As summer turned to fall, Construction began on visitor facilities designed to accommodate the heritage tourism program that was already generating significant interest from historical societies and educational institutions. Tom found himself working closely with Elena and her team to develop interpretive materials that would help visitors understand the significance of what they were seeing. The financial transformation of Tom's life was dramatic but gradual. The emergency preservation grant had solved his immediate crisis, but the ongoing grants, tax incentives, and tourism revenue were providing him with a steady income that exceeded what he'd ever made from farming. For the first time in decades, he found himself planning for the future rather than simply struggling to survive each season. More importantly, Tom discovered that he had a natural talent for sharing the history of his land with visitors. His combination of family oral history, practical knowledge of the landscape, and genuine enthusiasm for the archaeological discoveries made him an exceptionally effective tour guide. Educational groups particularly appreciated his ability to connect the abstract concept of historical preservation with the tangible realities of daily life on the frontier. Elena had become a regular presence on the property, splitting her time between ongoing research and developing the educational programs that were attracting visitors from across the region. Her professional relationship with Tom had evolved into something approaching friendship, built on mutual respect for each other's expertise and a shared commitment to preserving the historical integrity of the site. "You know," Elena said one afternoon as they watched a group of middle school students exploring the excavated trading post foundations, "when I first asked to borrow your shovel, I was hoping to find evidence of a simple trail. I never imagined we'd discover one of the most significant early American commercial sites in the region." Tom watched the students' excited faces as they examined artifacts in the site's newly constructed visitor center. "I never imagined that lending someone a rusty old shovel would save my farm and give me a completely new career. It's funny how life works sometimes," Elena mused. "You performed a simple act of kindness for a stranger, and it ended up changing both of our lives in ways we never could have predicted." The visitor center had become a source of particular pride for Tom. Built with preservation grant funding and designed to blend seamlessly with the historical character of the site, it housed displays of artifacts discovered during the excavations, interactive exhibits explaining the role of trading posts in early American development, and a research library where scholars could access the growing body of documentation about the site. The centerpiece of the visitor center was a display case containing the rusty shovel that had started it all, along with a placard explaining its role in the site's discovery. Tom had initially been reluctant to put his father's tool on display, but Elena had convinced him that the shovel's story was an integral part of the site's modern history. Visitors were consistently fascinated by the shovel display, particularly the story of how a simple act of neighborly kindness had led to the preservation of such an important historical site. Tom found that the shovel often served as a perfect starting point for discussing the broader themes of historical preservation and the importance of recognizing the historical significance that surrounds us in everyday life. As the first anniversary of Elena's initial visit approached, Tom reflected on the extraordinary changes that had transformed his life. His property had been designated as a National Historic Landmark, one of only a handful of such sites in the state. The trading post excavations had yielded over 3,000 artifacts, creating one of the most comprehensive archaeological records of early American frontier commerce ever assembled. The heritage tourism program had exceeded all expectations, bringing thousands of visitors to the site each year and generating revenue that supported not only Tom's stewardship of the land, but also ongoing research and preservation efforts. Educational partnerships with universities had established the site as a field school location for archaeology and history students, creating an additional revenue stream while ensuring that the research and interpretation of the site would continue for generations. Perhaps most significantly for Tom personally, his role as site steward and lead interpreter had given him a sense of purpose and accomplishment that his years of struggling with subsistence farming had never provided. He had discovered talents he never knew he possessed, and found himself genuinely excited about going to work each day. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Learning to navigate the complex world of historic preservation, dealing with the constant stream of visitors and researchers, and adapting to his new role as a public figure, had required significant adjustments. There had been moments when Tom missed the solitude and simplicity of his former life, but these were far outweighed by the satisfaction of knowing that his land was being preserved for future generations, and that his stewardship was contributing to a broader understanding of American history. Elena's prediction about the site reshaping understanding of early settlement patterns had proven accurate. The trading post discoveries had prompted a re-evaluation of frontier commerce networks throughout the region, leading to the identification and investigation of several related sites. Tom's property had become the anchor point for a broader initiative to preserve and interpret the network of trading posts and trails that had facilitated westward expansion. As Tom stood on his front porch on the anniversary morning, watching the sunrise illuminate the visitor center and the carefully preserved excavation sites, he thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A stranger had asked to borrow a shovel, and that simple request had revealed treasures that had been hidden beneath his feet for generations. The morning was interrupted by the familiar sound of Elena's SUV turning into the driveway. She had promised to spend the anniversary day at the site, partly for a scheduled television interview about the discovery, but mainly to celebrate what had become an annual tradition of reflecting on the remarkable year that had changed both of their lives. "Good morning, Mr. Bradley," she called out as she approached the porch, carrying a wrapped package under her arm. "Happy anniversary of the day that changed everything." "Good morning, Dr. Vasquez," Tom replied with a smile. "I was just thinking about how different everything looks now compared to a year ago." Elena looked across the property, taking in the visitor center, the preserved excavation sites, and the interpretive trails that now guided thousands of visitors each year through the landscape of early American history. It's remarkable how much can change when the right person asks the right question at the right moment. She handed Tom the wrapped package. "I have something for you, a little anniversary gift that I think you'll appreciate." Tom unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully crafted wooden display case containing a brand new shovel, its blade gleaming and its handle smooth and unmarked by use. A small plaque on the case read, "To Tom Bradley, whose generosity with an old shovel helped preserve a piece of American history for future generations." "Elena," Tom said, genuinely moved by the gesture, "this is beautiful, but I have to say, I've gotten pretty attached to the old rusty one." "Oh, you're keeping that one," Elena laughed. "This is for the future. For the next time someone shows up asking to borrow a shovel. Who knows what they might discover." Tom held the new shovel, marveling at its craftsmanship and the symbolism of Elena's gift. The idea that there might be more discoveries waiting, more strangers whose simple requests might unlock hidden treasures, was both exciting and slightly overwhelming. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "a year ago, if someone had told me that lending a shovel to a stranger would completely transform my life, I would have thought they were crazy." "That's the beautiful thing about historical preservation," Eleanor replied. "It teaches us that the most extraordinary things are often hidden in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone with the right knowledge and the right tools to reveal them." The television crew arrived shortly after noon, setting up their equipment near the visitor center for an interview that would be part of a documentary about unexpected historical discoveries. Tom had grown more comfortable with media attention over the past year, but he still felt nervous about being on camera. The interview went well, with Tom sharing the story of Elena's initial visit and the subsequent discoveries that had transformed his property into a nationally significant historical site. The interviewer was particularly interested in the human interest angle of the story, the way a simple act of kindness had led to such extraordinary consequences. "Mr. Bradley," the interviewer asked near the end of the session, "what advice would you give to other property owners who might be wondering if they're sitting on hidden historical treasures?" Tom thought for a moment before answering. "I'd say pay attention to the stories your family tells, the little details about how your land was used in the past. And if someone who seems to know what they're talking about asks for help with historical research, don't be afraid to say yes. You never know what you might discover." After the television crew departed, Tom and Elena walked the interpretive trail that now guided visitors through the key discoveries on the property. The trail began at the visitor center, moved through the excavated trading post foundations, included stops at several artifact discovery sites, and concluded at the location where Elena had first used Tom's father's shovel to uncover evidence of the historical trail. It's hard to believe that a year ago, most people walking through here would have seen nothing but an ordinary farm, Elena observed as they reached the original excavation site. I'm one of those people, Tom admitted. I walked past this spot thousands of times without having any idea what was underneath. It makes me wonder what else might be out there, waiting to be discovered. That's the thing about historical preservation, Elena said. Every discovery leads to new questions, new possibilities. What we've learned here has already helped identify potential sites throughout the region. Your willingness to let me explore your property has contributed to a much broader understanding of how early American commerce and settlement developed. As the day drew to a close, Tom and Elena sat on the front porch of the farmhouse, watching the last tour group of the day make their way back to the visitor center parking lot. The setting sun cast long shadows across the preserved excavation sites, creating a golden tableau that seemed to bridge the gap between past and present. You know what I find most remarkable about this whole experience? Tom said, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled between them. It's not just that we discovered all this history. It's that the history was always here. My great-great-grandfather built his house maybe 50 yards from where people were conducting business a century and a half ago. 4 generations of my family lived on this land without knowing we were literally walking on top of one of the most significant trading posts in the region, end quote. Elena nodded thoughtfully. That's one of the most profound aspects of historical preservation work. We're not creating history, we're revealing it. The stories were always there, the artifacts were always there. The evidence of human activity and community was always there. We just needed the right tools and the right perspective to see it, end quote. Speaking of tools, Tom said, glancing toward the visitor center where his father's shovel was displayed. I've been thinking about something. That shovel represented 4 generations of my family's connection to this land. My great-great-grandfather probably used similar tools to clear the land and build the original Beret homestead. My great-grandfather used tools like it to establish the farm that supported his family. My grandfather and father used that specific shovel to maintain and improve the property that they hoped to pass down to future generations. And now it's helped ensure that the land will be preserved for many future generations, Elena added. In a way, your family's stewardship of this property made the historical preservation possible. If you hadn't maintained the land, if you hadn't been willing to help a stranger with research, if you hadn't shared your family's oral history about the old trails, we might never have made these discoveries. Tom stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out across the property that had been transformed from a struggling farm into a nationally recognized historical site. I've been thinking about legacy lately. A year ago, I was terrified that I was going to be the generation that lost the family land. That I'd be the one who broke a chain that had lasted almost 150 years. Now I realize that maybe my role wasn't to continue farming this land the way my ancestors did, but to help discover and preserve the deeper history that makes this place truly significant. End quote. The weight of Tom's words settled over them both. Elena had worked on dozens of historical preservation projects, but few had demonstrated so clearly the connection between individual stewardship and broader historical understanding. Tom's willingness to help a stranger, rooted in generations of rural hospitality and community values, had directly led to the preservation of irreplaceable historical resources. There's something I haven't told you, Elena said after a few moments. When I first started researching this area, I contacted several other property owners about exploring their land for traces of the old trading routes. Most of them said no, either because they were suspicious of outsiders or because they didn't want strangers digging around their property. You were the only one who said yes without hesitation. Tom turned back toward Elena, surprised by this revelation. I had no idea you'd approached other people first. 3 other property owners, actually. All of them had land that my research suggested might contain evidence of historical activity. But they weren't interested in having researchers explore their properties. If you had said no as well, I probably would have had to abandon this particular research project and focus on areas where I had better access. The implications of Elena's statement hung in the air between them, Not only had Tom's willingness to help led to the discovery and preservation of the trading post site, but his openness had been the crucial factor that made the entire project possible. The historical significance of the site might have remained hidden indefinitely if not for his immediate and generous response to a stranger's request. "That makes the whole thing feel even more like fate, doesn't it?" Tom said with a slight smile. "All those factors had to align perfectly. Your research identifying this area, me being here when you stopped by, my willingness to let you explore, even the storm that had torn up the ground and made artifacts more visible." Elena laughed softly. "As a scientist, I'm supposed to believe in systematic research and methodical investigation rather than fate. But I have to admit, there were so many coincidences involved in this discovery that it's hard not to feel like something larger was at work." They were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Tom recognized the vehicle as belonging to Dr. Harrison, the archaeologist who had become a regular presence at the site over the past year. James Harrison emerged from his car carrying what appeared to be another artifact container, his expression suggesting he had news to share. "Tom." "Elena," Dr. Harrison called out as he approached the porch. "I'm glad I caught you both here. I have some results from the latest round of artifact analysis that I think you'll find very exciting." Elena and Tom exchanged glances of anticipation. Even a year after the initial discoveries, new artifacts were still being uncovered and analyzed on a regular basis, each one adding to the growing understanding of the site's historical significance. "What did you find?" Elena asked as Dr. Harrison joined them on the porch. Dr. Harrison set down his container and pulled out his ever-present notebook. "We've been analyzing the ceramic fragments found in the deepest layer of the bay, main storage area. The pieces we thought might be from the earliest period of the trading post's operation. The analysis confirmed that they date to the very early 1800s, but more importantly, we've been able to trace their origin." He paused for dramatic effect, clearly enjoying the anticipation he was creating. "These ceramics were manufactured in Staffordshire, England, and shipped to Philadelphia, then transported overland to this trading post. We're talking about luxury goods that traveled thousands of miles to reach this remote frontier location." Tom felt a familiar thrill at hearing about new discoveries on his property. Over the past year, he had developed a genuine fascination with the artifacts and what they revealed about the people who had lived and worked on his land centuries earlier. "What does that tell us about the trading post?" Tom asked. "It tells us that this wasn't just a local trading operation," Dr. Harrison explained with growing excitement. "This was a sophisticated commercial enterprise connected to international trade networks. The people operating this trading post were importing luxury goods from Europe and distributing them throughout the frontier region. We're looking at one of the most advanced commercial operations of its time in this part of the country." Elena shook her head in amazement. "Every time we think we understand the scope of what was happening here, we discover evidence that it was even more significant than we imagined." Dr. Harrison opened his artifact container and carefully removed a partially reconstructed ceramic piece, a delicate cup with an intricate blue and white pattern that had somehow survived burial for over 2 centuries. His cup probably cost more than most frontier families made in a month. The fact that it ended up here, in what we think of as the middle of nowhere, demonstrates the remarkable reach and sophistication of early American commerce. Tom accepted the cup carefully, marveling at its delicate construction and elegant design. It was difficult to reconcile this evidence of luxury and international trade with his mental image of rough frontier life. "It's hard to imagine people out here drinking tea from English china." "That's exactly the point," Elena said. "Our understanding of frontier life has been shaped by stereotypes about rough pioneers living in primitive conditions. What we're discovering here suggests that even on the frontier, people maintained connections to broader cultural and commercial networks. They weren't isolated from civilization, they were extending it into new territories." Dr. Harrison pulled out several more artifacts, each one adding another piece to the complex puzzle of life at the trading post. There were metal implements that had been manufactured in Pittsburgh, glass beads that had originated in Venice, and leather goods that showed evidence of sophisticated tanning and crafting techniques. The trading post operators were clearly serving a much more diverse and affluent customer base than we initially assumed. Dr. Harrison continued. We're finding evidence of goods that would have appealed to wealthy settlers, government officials, even Native American leaders who were participating in the early trade economy. As Dr. Harrison packed up his artifacts and prepared to leave, he handed Tom a thick folder of documents. These are copies of all the research reports and analysis results from the past year. I thought you might want to have a complete record of what we've discovered on your property. Tom accepted the folder with genuine gratitude. Over the past year, he had developed a deep interest in understanding every aspect of the historical research being conducted on his land. The reports would give him the detailed knowledge he needed to provide even more comprehensive information to visitors and researchers. After Dr. Harrison departed, Tom and Eleanor remained on the porch as darkness settled over the property. The visitor center was closed for the day, but security lighting illuminated the key areas of the site, creating an almost mystical atmosphere around the preserved excavations. Elena, Tom said thoughtfully, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything that's happened this past year. When you first asked to borrow that shovel, I was facing the loss of everything my family had built here. Now I have financial security, meaningful work, and the knowledge that this land will be preserved for future generations. But more than that, I've learned things about my own property and my own family's history that I never would have discovered otherwise. Elena smiled warmly. Tom, I should be thanking you. This discovery has become the centerpiece of my research career. The Trading Post site has generated more academic papers, conference presentations, and research opportunities than any other project I've worked on. But beyond the professional benefits, working here has reminded me why I got into historical preservation in the first place. What do you mean? Historical preservation can sometimes become abstract, focused on bureaucratic processes and academic theories, rather than real people and real stories. Working with you and seeing how historical preservation can transform someone's life while simultaneously preserving irreplaceable cultural resources, it's reminded me that the work we do has profound human impact. Tom stood up and walked over to the new shovel that Elena had given him earlier, still leaning against the porch railing where he had left it. Do you really think someone else might show up someday asking to borrow this one? I hope so, Eleanor replied. Not because I expect to find another trading post, though stranger things have happened, but because the attitude that led you to say yes to a stranger's request is exactly what makes historical preservation possible. Most of our most important discoveries happen because someone like you is willing to share their knowledge and their land with researchers. Tom picked up the new shovel, feeling its weight and examining its craftsmanship in the dim porch light. Well, if someone does show up asking to borrow it, I'll definitely say yes. I've learned that you never know what might be buried right under your feet. As Elena prepared to leave, she paused at the top of the porch steps and looked back across the property one more time. Tom, I want you to know that what happened here, this whole experience, has changed how I approach my BM work. I've started spending more time talking to local property owners, learning about family histories and oral traditions before I begin any research project. What you taught me about the value of local knowledge has made me a better researcher. And what you taught me about the value of historical preservation has given me a completely new understanding of what it means to be a steward of this land, Tom replied. My ancestors preserved this property by farming it and maintaining it as a working landscape. Now I'm preserving it by protecting its historical integrity and sharing its stories with people from all over the country. Elena climbed into her SUV and rolled down the window for one final exchange. Same time next year for our anniversary celebration? Absolutely, Tom said with a grin. Though I have to admit, I'm curious to see what we might discover between now and then. As Elena drove away, Tom remained on the porch, holding the new shovel and contemplating the extraordinary changes that had transformed his life. The folder of research reports sat on the porch table, waiting to be read and absorbed. The visitor center stood silently in the distance, filled with artifacts and displays that told the story of early American commerce and community. But it was the original shovel, displayed in its place of honor in the visitor center, that truly captured the essence of what had happened over the past year. A simple tool, used for generations by his family to work the land, had become the instrument that revealed the deeper history hidden beneath the surface. It represented the continuity between past and present, the connection between individual actions and broader historical understanding. Tom looked up at the stars, clearer and brighter than they had seemed in years, perhaps because he was no longer consumed with worry about losing his home. Tomorrow would bring new visitors eager to learn about the trading post, new researchers with questions about the artifacts, and new opportunities to share the remarkable story of discovery and preservation that had unfolded on his land. The rusty shovel had done more than help preserve a piece of American history. It had preserved Tom's own family's connection to the land they had stewarded for generations. In helping a stranger uncover the past, Tom had secured his own future and ensured that the Bradley family's legacy would continue for generations to come. As he finally headed inside for the night, Tom reflected on the profound truth that Elena had helped him understand, that the most extraordinary discoveries often begin with the most ordinary acts of human kindness. A stranger had asked to borrow a shovel, and that simple request had changed everything, revealing treasures that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface for someone with the right tools and the willingness to dig deeper into the rich layers of American history.